Welcome to China's Spectrum. I'm Marcus Thorne. Today we break down the latest shifts in China's geopolitics, tech, and financial markets. Let's get to the news. What if the Samsung strike you just heard about is actually the key to understanding who really controls the global chip industry? Let's start with NVIDIA, the company everyone watches when AI comes up. Jensen Huang stands at the center of the AI revolution, and NVIDIA has almost single-handedly propped up the entire artificial intelligence boom. But here is what most people miss. The empire at the peak of global technology rests on two shaky pillars. Snap one, and the whole structure starts to wobble. NVIDIA has always been a pure chip designer. It operates not a single wafer fab of its own. Every high-end chip is fully outsourced to TSMC. On top of that, HBM, the high-bandwidth memory that powers every AI accelerator, depends heavily on South Korean suppliers. That means the moment TSMC hits a production snag or a link in the Korean supply chain snaps, NVIDIA turns overnight into a company sitting on blueprints it cannot turn into silicon. The recent Samsung labor dispute is a textbook case of just how fragile this chain really is. A full-scale shutdown was narrowly averted, but even the warm-down phase caused meaningful production cuts, and the market reacted before the dust settled. HBM prices jumped sharply, with some high-end HBM3E models rising by roughly 20%. NVIDIA's delivery lead times stretched by months. H100 and H200 orders are now backed up to year-end, while Blackwell generation orders have been pushed well into the first half of next year. For an industry that runs on speed, these delays are a serious shock, you might ask. Why doesn't NVIDIA simply build its own fabs? It is not that it does not want to. It is that it genuinely cannot. A single cutting-edge wafer fab runs well over $20 billion to build. Annual depreciation alone eats through the billions. More critically, fabrication demands hundreds of thousands of seasoned engineers and skilled technicians, plus decades of accumulated know-how. That is a problem no amount of cash can simply solve. So Jensen Huang has to eat at the table of others for the foreseeable future. Now let's turn to TSMC, the foundry king that NVIDIA depends on, and the quiet trap it is walking into. TSMC spent 30 years growing from an unremarkable startup into the undisputed leader of global semiconductor manufacturing. Its 3-nanometer yields are rock solid. Its 2-nanometer research is ahead of the curve. It commands more than 70% of the world's high-end foundry orders. Apple, Qualcomm, AMD, NVIDIA. No top tech company functions without TSMC's capacity. Yet TSMC's greatest strength has become its biggest blind spot. The relentless push toward the cutting edge is causing the company to let its grip on mature nodes slip. In the race to lead 3-nanometer and 2-nanometer production, TSMC has tilted virtually all resources toward advanced nodes and even 1-nanometer research. It is steadily shrinking investment in mature process capacity and gradually reducing older 8-inch lines. Here is what many overlook. More than 70% of all chips shipped globally still come from those so-called legacy processes. Automotive electronics, industrial control, consumer appliances, telecom base stations, the sectors that keep the world running all depend on mature node chips. By stepping back from this trillion-dollar market, TSMC has handed later entrants a perfect opening. On top of that, geopolitics is tightening around TSMC like a straitjacket. Forced to build in the United States, TSMC's Arizona plant is costing 4 to 5 times more than comparable fabs in Taiwan. The N4 node has reached mass production with yields matching Taiwan's, but the second Arizona fab is not expected to begin 3-nanometer production until late 2027. The technology gap with its home base remains real. TSMC won the technology war, but it is losing its autonomy. Then there is Samsung, sitting right in the eye of the storm, with a crisis that goes far deeper than the headlines suggest. Samsung was once the world's only company simultaneously mastering memory chips, foundry services, chip design, and consumer electronics. Through counter-cyclical investments, it held a near monopoly on the global memory market for 33 straight years. But today's Samsung is facing pressures from both within and without. Internally, the imbalance in labor-income distribution has pushed workers to the breaking point. Samsung Electronics saw consolidated operating profit surge 756% year-over-year in the first quarter of 2026, driven almost entirely by its semiconductor division. Meanwhile, employee wages climbed at a crawl. For the same HBM work, SK Hynix staff walk away with year-end bonuses running into the millions of won, while Samsung employees get a fraction of that. The gap was simply too large. Semiconductor fabs must run around the clock. One day of downtime sends tens of thousands of wafers straight to the scrap pile. South Korea's prime minister estimated the direct cost of a single day of shutdown at 1 trillion won. The damage to Samsung goes far deeper than headline billions. The trust it lost with its customers is what really stings. Externally, Samsung is caught between two fronts. In foundry, it launched the GAA architecture 3nm process ahead of TSMC. But persistently low yields have handed virtually all high-end AI chip orders to its rival. In its own core memory business, Samsung's 33-year reign over the DRAM market was briefly overtaken by SK Hynix in the first quarter of 2025. And although Samsung reclaimed the top spot by year's end, the damage was done. In HBM, the single most important memory segment of the AI era, Samsung has fallen to third place. In the second quarter of 2025, SK Hynix commanded 62% of global HBM shipments, Micron held 21%, and Samsung was left with just 17%. Samsung tried, but it made the wrong call from the start. While SK Hynix went all in on HBM, Samsung kept chasing volume expansion in legacy DRAM. By the time it realized the shift, the market was already claimed. Now here is where the story takes a sharp turn. While these three giants wrestle with their own problems, China has been quietly locking in its most critical position through a strategy of patient, steady execution. Critics dismiss China's semiconductor push as nothing but cash throwing. A never-ending chase that will never catch TSMC or Samsung. They misunderstand what this strategy is actually about. It was never designed to win a showdown at the cutting edge. The core idea is to root down in the foundation of the industry, to answer whether we have it and whether there is enough before debating whether it is the best. Like farmers in a field, no lottery ticket thinking, just steady hands and one step at a time. So what is China's first major move? SMIC holding the mature process line while the rest of the world looks elsewhere. As global foundries pour capital into the cutting edge, a structural gap has opened in mature node capacity. That gap is exactly where SMIC has positioned itself. It did not chase 2nm or 1nm mirages. Instead, it concentrated all resources on mastering mainstream mature processes at 28nm and 14nm nodes, aggressively expanding 300mm wafer capacity and pushing yields higher. The numbers tell the story. SMIC recorded total revenue of 67.3 billion yuan in 2025, up 16.5% year-over-year. Month-end 8-inch equivalent standard logic capacity reached 1.059 million wafers, adding roughly 110,000 wafers year-over-year. Annual shipment volume hit approximately 9.7 million wafers, with average capacity utilization at an impressive 93.5%. The ripple effect is already visible in global trade. In the first 4 months of this year, China's integrated circuit exports rose 10.6% in volume and surged 83.7% in value. At the same time, China's auto exports jumped more than 50% year-over-year, covering every tier of the automotive market. Many of these vehicles depend on China-made chips, making China one of the most critical supply sources for the global auto industry. Automakers, appliance makers, and industrial equipment manufacturers around the world are increasingly dependent on China-made, mature node chips. Whoever controls mature process capacity controls the foundation of this industry. And that foundation cannot be easily displaced. And move number 2? CXMT and YMTC breaking the memory monopoly that three names held for decades. For years, Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron controlled virtually the entire global memory market. They raised prices at will and cut production at will. A standard solid-state drive once sold for thousands of yuan. And consumers had no choice but to absorb the swings. With the rise of China's memory powerhouses, that dynamic has finally shifted. When CXMT brought DRAM to mass production, it priced its chips roughly a third below the global average, putting immediate pressure on the established cartel. YMTC's 3D NAND technology keeps pushing boundaries. With its latest 294-layer NAND flash, featuring 232 active layers, now in full-scale production at international advanced levels. It has successfully entered the supply chains of top-tier global consumer electronics brands. According to Q3 2025 data, CXMT holds 8% of the global DRAM market, firmly in fourth place worldwide. By the first quarter of 2026, YMTC's shipment share of the global NAND flash market had broken through 13%, with revenue share still trailing its volume share due to lower pricing, yet solidly positioned in the global top 6 and closing the gap on Micron at a rapid pace. And here is the twist that ties this all together. The global memory supply gap triggered by Samsung's strike handed China's memory duo an unexpected opening. Customers who once relied on Samsung, now fearing supply disruption, are shifting orders to YMTC and CXMT. This is not a temporary stopgap. This is a structural shift in the making. After a supply chain crisis like this, companies worldwide have learned one lesson. You do not put all your eggs in one basket. But the story goes even deeper than capacity and market share. Behind the scenes, a complete domestic supply chain is taking shape across the entire ecosystem. While expanding wafer capacity, China is simultaneously advancing every core upstream link, from semiconductor equipment and materials to EDA software. In etching equipment, AMEC's machines have already entered advanced production lines at major foundries. In thin film deposition, Nara has captured a growing share of domestic procurement. Even in lithography, the most formidable challenge, SMI has delivered 28-nanometer capable steppers for mature process lines, with next-generation tools in development. The ecosystem is not yet complete, but the momentum is undeniable. China is building a complete, independent, and secure domestic semiconductor ecosystem. Once fully formed, it will be remarkably resilient to external shocks. No matter how severe the blockade or how turbulent the international climate, China can guarantee its own industrial supply security. That is an advantage the overseas giants will struggle to match, given their internal friction, their dependence on single-track systems, and their growing geopolitical constraints. So let's step back and answer the question that started this whole conversation. In this reshaping of the global semiconductor landscape, who is the real winner? In the short term, the status quo holds. TSMC will still dominate high-end foundry. Jensen Huang will keep harvesting the AI dividend. Samsung will still hold significant ground in memory. But the long-term picture is already taking shape. Samsung faces a cyclical challenge that will test its resilience on multiple fronts. NVIDIA, without its own manufacturing capability, will always remain a guest at someone else's table. TSMC will stay constrained by geopolitics, with its room to maneuver steadily shrinking. China, through steady execution of its patient strategy, has already locked in two of the most critical positions in this game. It controls mature process capacity and is rapidly scaling memory supply. It commands the world's largest chip market, the most complete industrial base, and a vast pool of engineering talent. The semiconductor industry once lived by the famous smile curve theory, the idea that design and sales sit at the high-margin ends, while manufacturing sits in the low-margin middle. For years, everyone looked down on manufacturing. That theory is now evolving. In an era of intensifying geopolitical rivalry and supply chain turbulence, Manufacturing capability is becoming the core competitive edge. Without it, the best designs are just scrap paper. Without a stable supply chain, even the biggest market is a castle in the air. Of course, the road ahead remains long and demanding. China still trails the global leaders at the cutting edge, and it still faces severe external blockades. But as long as China stays the course, steady and deliberate, one step at a time, full autonomy over its semiconductor industry moves closer with every passing quarter. That concludes today's briefing. For more sharp analysis on China, subscribe to China Spectrum. I'm Marcus Thorne. Thank you for watching.